So hello everyone, welcome to PAN, the Print Archive Network Forum. I'm Matthew Revitt, the moderator for PAN. My day job is the main shared collections librarian at the University of Maine, and I'm also the shared print consultant for EAST, the Eastern Academic Scholars Trust. Thank you as ever to the Centre for Research Libraries who sponsor PAN, particularly Marie Waltz, who handles much of the logistics and works on the programming with me. Just a few housekeeping points before we start. Can you please make sure that you are muted and turn off your camera sharing unless you're presenting? If you do have any questions for any of the presenters, please submit them in the chat, or you can unmute yourselves and ask them at the end of each presentation. Copies of the slides are actually already available on the PAN website, and I'm just going to put a link into the chat in a minute or two. For those of you new to PAN, we normally meet together in person at the ALA conferences. But obviously with the pandemic, we've decided to go remote. On the plus side, this online format has meant that we were able to welcome a lot of folks who normally wouldn't be able to attend, including some of today's presenters. If you aren't already a member, I would encourage you to join the PAN listserv, where you'll see announcements about future forums and receive the update reports submitted by programs. Thank you to those of you who've already submitted your reports for today. And again, you can check those out online alongside previous PAN updates and presentation slides from other PAN updates as well. And there'll also be a recording of today's session added to the archive as well. Just a reminder, if you do have subject ideas for future forums, please send them mine or Marie's way. So we're going to kick things off today with a update section, which I'm excited to say has today an international flavour, featuring 3 European shared print programmes, starting off first with an overview of shared print archiving in Germany, followed by 2 updates from UK projects, starting with the regional White Rose Group based in Yorkshire, and then we'll be hearing from the UK Research Reserve Collaborative Print Journal Collection, a nationwide shared print programme managed by the British Library. Next up will be a panel discussion on programme assessment, featuring representatives from 3 of the major shared print programmes in North America, the Eastern Academic Scholars Trust, Western Regional Storage Trust, and the Hartley Trust. We'll wrap things up with 2 short presentations on recent enhancements to the journal gap filling tool and UConn's Brittle Books project. There'll be time after each presentation for questions and also during the panel discussion as well. Again, please use the chat to send the questions as you think of them, and we'll collect them for the end of each presentation. So our first presenter today is André Schüller, who is the Library Director at Regensburg University. André will be providing an overview of shared print archiving in Germany. Thank you, André.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much, Matthew and Mary and Susan, for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. I'll just share my screen. So, as you probably all know, let me see. There we are. As you probably all know or not, Germany has a tradition of shared collections and archiving. We don't have a national library, but we do have a collection of German prints, which is a library cooperative, a cooperative collection, with 6 libraries, each specializing in one period. We've also got copyright libraries and copyright laws, national and regional. And up to the 2010s, we could look back to 5 decades of coordinated acquisition, funded by the German Research Foundation with 1 library for every scholarly subject. Well, unfortunately, the German Research Foundation decided to cut the program and replace it with a program for digital acquisition, which I think was a mistake, but anyway. Established in 2011, we also have a coordination office for the preservation of written cultural heritage, KEC, which focuses on classic preservation measures, such as deacidification, but unfortunately hardly on shared archiving. So all of this might sound good, but there's much too much uncoordinated deacquisitioning going on. German scholarly libraries have deacquisitioned about 20 million volumes in the last 10 years. So based on that, the National Assembly of Scholarly Libraries decided to establish a working group in 2017 with 9 members from different types of libraries and chaired by me accidentally. Our mission was to identify solutions for a better coordination of print preservation. So what we did in order to achieve that was analyze the literature, collect and analyze the legal bases, different legal bases of print preservation, such as regional guidelines and laws. We collected reference models for shared archiving projects. We analyzed metadata quality and tools, and which was a major part, we consulted with quite a lot of different stakeholders. And the result of all this was that we published recommendations for the National Assembly of Scholarly Libraries in 2020. So what did we find? We found that the legal basis for securing print in Germany are insufficient and heterogeneous. Copyright laws are very heterogeneous in terminology as in scope. Library laws and deacquisitioning or archiving regulations don't exist in every region. And if they exist, they mostly speak vaguely of collections with historical or cultural value, whatever that is. For specialized collections or foreign language scholarly literature, there are hardly any written regulations. And here also the terminological variety and diversity of scope are high. If you look at regulations for single institutions, such as university libraries, they rarely point to preservation or even cooperative preservation as a function of the local library. Mine didn't before I got the job. Deacquisition guidelines, detailed collection principles, or preservation policies for single institutions are rare. Thus, the existing legal bases hardly allow us a precise overview as to who's actually preserving what, thus retention commitments. If you look at metadata, as all of you know, metadata are crucial for shared archiving. Only through metadata we can answer the 2 main questions. Firstly, what is rare, thus collection analysis? And secondly, how can retention commitments be recorded and thus preservation action be coordinated? Again, we don't have a national catalogue in Germany, but all 6 regional catalogues have implemented MARC 503 action notes in 2019. So retention commitments can now be recorded. That was actually a bit of a success for our working group. Also, we do have a nationwide journals database with the quality, while the quality of title metadata is very high, the quality of holdings data isn't always sufficient, which makes automatic collection analysis quite hard. But that journals database has also implemented MARC 503 in 2019. With Culturegraph, which is a meta-repository for the data from the regional catalogues, we do have a promising instrument for national collection analysis, which already includes clustering algorithms. What we need, though, are tools that allow a single library in a short-term deacquisitioning situation to check the holdings efficiently against the national holdings. So, of course, we looked at reference models. There are just a few single examples of shared archiving projects in Germany, such as the Speicherverbund Nord, which is a cooperative of 6 libraries in northern Germany, or the collection analysis project in the state of Baden-Württemberg. Mainly, we looked at international models, such as we'll hear about the UK Research Reserve today. What we found interesting also was the Swiss model, the shared print archiving in Swiss libraries, and of course the wonderful US examples such as the Rosemont, the Partnership for Shared Book Collections, and Half-Eye Trust. The first thing we made public as a working group was a collection of guidelines. Just a few, if you like, philosophical principles which we wanted to put out there because we wanted to discuss them with the library community. And that actually proved quite controversial. Those are quite simple principles, but not everybody agreed, I can tell you. We'll see if you agree. The libraries continue to be responsible for cultural heritage in the digital age. That was controversial because not everybody agrees on that. The second one is especially controversial. This responsibility for cultural heritage is shared by all scholarly libraries, not just a few big ones. We had quite a lot of libraries in Germany who said, discussing this, that either we don't have the resources to do a shared print or print preservation at all, or it's not our job to preserve, it's just our job to provide access. So that was quite a discussion, I can tell you. But I think it's an important principle, and we need to share, to create mechanisms that allow even libraries with low and limited resources to participate in preservation and shared archiving. Permanent accessibility of information relies on the permanent existence of physical originals. That was quite controversial too, but there are lots of dimensions to this. For example, if you digitize a physical copy for scholarly use, and after 5 years or 10 years, scholars notice that this digitization doesn't answer certain questions. You need to have recourse to the physical object again and maybe digitize it again in a different way, and so on. There are lots of examples for this. Effective preservation can only be achieved cooperatively. Of course, that's shared archiving. And this only works on the basis of precisely documented responsibilities and of consistent and complete metadata. The next principle is if you like, a diplomatic concession to those libraries who actually wanted to deacquisition more. So cooperative collecting and necessary deacquisitioning complement each other. The next one is very important too. Digital and print preservation need to be thought together, because in my experience, digital preservation people and print preservation people hardly speak to each other. And that's a problem. So we need to cure that. And lastly, the time for action is now. There was a British report which said rareness is common, and that is actually the case. So the time for action is now. So those were the guidelines we put out there to the community. And after a lot of work, we came to the following technical recommendations. We said that there is urgent need in Germany for action regarding the technical basis for collection analysis, for automatized markup of holdings data, I'll explain that in a moment, and the recording of retention commitments. We suggested that we should further develop culture graph towards in the direction of end user tools for collection analysis and comparison, as well as develop mechanisms for the automatized markup of potentially rare holdings and the automatized recording of copy quantities. Thus, what we want is that you look at a library catalog, maybe a regional catalog, and see at once how many copies of my title are in the region or in the nation. Plus, what we want if copy quantities go below a certain quantity, such as 3 copies nationally or 5 or 7. We want a huge red flag for every librarian of every qualification to see that, beware, this title is potentially rare. It's only potentially because metadata quality isn't always up to scratch. But I think those flags are really helpful. We recommend nationwide use of Mark 583 action notes for the entire range of preservation activities. We recommend to create tools for automatized recording of commitment data for entire collections at one push of the button, if you like, for the entire collection. We need communication tools and tools for collection comparison, as well as methods for recording collection contexts and state of preservation. Also, we need constant enhancement of metadata quality and the more linking of print and digital copies. And finally, we need a renewed focus on metadata in library training, which hasn't been the case in the past few years. So, to add a few more general recommendations, diplomatically speaking, of course, we recommended that libraries should proceed step by step and voluntarily. Nobody's forced to do anything. Libraries were very afraid of being forced to do anything. And we suggested they should build on existing structures. We recommended that libraries in Germany should build additional safety nets through cooperations, either regional, subject or object-based, with clear definitions and commitment levels. Plus, we should establish regional principles, such as the last copy principles in my state of Bavaria, which basically says you're not allowed to throw away the last copy in the region. It is surprising to see that this principle is only valid in Bavaria, not in all the other states. We suggest that every library should begin systematic recording of retention commitments, starting with holdings where they already have defined preservation responsibilities, such as copyright libraries, as well as with last copies and unique objects. We also said that they should combine retention commitments with other action notes from other fields and make retention commitments a requirement for the granting of external funding. And not only concerning funding for preservation projects, but funding for digitization projects, for example. We also suggested that the libraries should create defined preservation profiles for themselves. I've already mentioned the markup for potentially rare holdings. We suggested that print cooperatives should be coordinated nationally, and that the different fields of shared archiving, preservation, digitization, and digital preservation should be coordinated, which they are not at the moment, really. So, after all those recommendations, we concluded that we'd seen during the years 2017 to 2020 quite a series of promising projects in the field of shared archiving, such as the implementation of 583, or the nationwide decision of regional copyright libraries to start recording retention commitments. Plus, we've seen increased funding for print preservation due to the political activities of the KEG. It's now crucial that we keep the momentum and make that the decisive technical and practical steps in collection analysis, automatic markup, and retention commitments. Because, as B.F. Riley Jr. wrote, the present generation of librarians will make consequential and irreversible decisions on the maintenance and disposition of an unparalleled legacy of research materials and historical evidence. Those decisions, and that's a very important sentence, must rest upon a solid foundation of information and commitment. Information, that's collection analysis, and commitment, that's retention commitments. So after all this, in my last slide, I'll tell you what happened afterwards, after we published and presented the recommendations. The National Assembly of Scholarly Libraries declared our recommendations to be an important basis for further work in shared archiving and officially decided to support the following actions. We have a regional catalogs working group in Germany where all the 6 regional catalogs work together and do their projects. So this working group is asked to develop technical solutions for collection analysis, focusing on mechanisms that allow a single library to efficiently check their holdings against the national and regional holdings, plus mechanisms for statistical analysis of library holdings and for automatic markup. Also, they are to create technical mechanisms for the recording of retention commitments for larger collections and holdings. The National Assembly of Scholarly Libraries recommends to its member libraries to use existing mechanisms such as 583, and it asks its board of directors to contact the KEG, focusing on interfaces between classic preservation and shared archiving, on possible links between external funding and shared archiving, as well as on questions of political communication concerning shared archiving. So on the whole, you could say that our working group was a bit of a success. We were quite glad that this was actually decided. And I think it's the first step for proper shared archiving in Germany. So thank you very much for listening. It's been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to your questions.
André, if you could unmute yourselves, and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them, or you could put them in the chat if you'd prefer. So it looks like we've got one question just coming in from Susan Stearns. She's wondering what role access through standard interlibrary loan or other mechanisms is fundamental to the work in Germany.
It is fundamental. Of course, we've got a national interlibrary loan system. It's been established for decades, and that's the backbone of German librarianship, if you like. Well, can I answer that? I've seen the...
oh, you've seen them? Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Well, copyright libraries, there's a national copyright library which gets 2 copies of every volume published in Germany by professional publishers without cost. Plus, there are regional libraries, 1 for every region, which get a copy of every book published in that region without any cost. So the publishers have to send those copies to the library. So we've got 1 for every region. And this is, they have to preserve it basically forever. That's their job, you know. So copyright libraries are quite important for archiving.
André, this is Kirsten Leonard, chairing the Partnership for Shared Book Collections this year. I have a question for you. I noted with interest, especially since I also have a role with a small library consortium, about that concern about the role that the small libraries or underfunded libraries might have. Has your group considered any kind of communication campaign for funders to show the importance of those libraries to the national collection? Does that come up in any of your discussions?
Well, not yet, but I think it's a very good suggestion. I mean, we need lots of publicity work in order for people to understand what the positive things about shared archiving are. Even librarians, you know, we've had so many skeptics concerning this project because, and with very different fears, you know. We've had people who thought that because of our work, because of talking about shared archiving, people would de-acquisition more because they could rely on libraries archiving certain things so they can throw it away, and the other way around. So people were fearing that actually by being regulated, they'd be able to de-acquisition less, which they didn't want. So that was quite a discussion, I can tell you.
Understood. Yes, I think, and it's a big job. So this may be a point of coordination, certainly at PAN, in terms of how we communicate both with our workers, librarians, and staff, as well as the external stakeholders and funders. Thank you, André. I appreciate that.
So Alison has a question in the chat. I don't know whether you saw that, André, but she asks, where can we stay up to date on the progress of your working groups?
Well, that's a good question. I'm not sure we've got any international publicity going on. I would suggest just ask me in regular in a regular rhythm. Maybe
André will invite you back in the future to kind of give us an update on where you are, and that might be a good way as well to keep folks updated. So
I'd love to do that.
Thank you. We're getting a few more questions in. Can you see them, André? We don't have too much time left, but maybe if you could answer Laura's question.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question. How shared print and resource sharing efforts coexist in Germany? What do you mean by resource sharing efforts?
Maybe the physical lending of materials.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's not that much shared print or shared archiving in that sense going on already. You know, we're just starting up. There are just a few small initiatives. So I don't think there's a specific nexus between these two.
So I think we'll just have one question that Constance has asked is, I'm curious to know if there are any plans to create incentives for participation by smaller academic and specialist libraries.
Yes, we've talked about that, especially very small libraries. We've got a different, section of that National Assembly is for special scholarly libraries. It's hard to articulate that. They're very small usually, 10 to 20,000 volumes or something. And those are libraries of academies and other very small institutions. And we'll be talking to them because I think they've got very, very important holdings, but usually hardly any resources to care about preservation at all. And that's a very important point.
Thank you, André. I really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.